Hi, everybody. Welcome to Experts Dig In with Doggies for Dementia. I am Carmen DeValis, and I am the founder of Doggies for Dementia Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. And our big mission is to raise awareness. We believe the world could be a lot more compassionate, kind, and understanding for people who are impacted by dementia, including caregivers. And a lot of what we do is raise awareness. We use photography and stories to help show the people and the stories that they have lived their lives in order to reduce some of that stigma. And we add dogs into the mix because dogs are quite popular on social media. And we know people will stop to read a story when there's a little doggy involved. And I think as a photographer, how much cooler it is to have a dog in the photo because people forget that I'm even there. So that's our story about Doggies for Dementia. And this is our program to help raise awareness. Yeah, today I am really excited. We have a guest that I have been following their podcast. This is Bobbi Carducci. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. And so Bobbi and her husband, I just went blank. Roger, I just went blank on his name. Roger. Sorry, Roger.
Roger is my father-in-law. Michael is my husband.
That's what I get, right? And so Bobbi and her husband,
Mike.
I'll have to edit that. And so Bobbi and her husband, Mike, have a podcast called Rodger That. Did I say the whole name completely?
That's right.
Rodger That. Yeah. And this has all come about. This is about their journey with a caregiver for Mike's father who had dementia. And I was so curious to learn more about the journey for them. And I'm delighted to have Bobbi here so we can talk about that today. So, it,
I love to talk about the experience I had as a caregiver. I'm really dedicated to supporting caregivers. And I think when we share our stories and we make that connection, it really makes a difference because very often caregivers will say, if you haven't done it, there's no way you can understand what it's really like.
mm-hmm.
And Roger That is named after my father-in-law, Roger.
Yeah, Roger. Yeah, what a cute name too. It got my attention. And I think what you had to say there about caregiving and not understanding until you do it, for probably a whole decade, I was a nurse practitioner caring for people, families impacted by dementia and other chronically ill problems, but I worked with caregivers a lot. And so, I'm thinking, I really understand what that's like. I really get that. But until I was a caregiver for a friend of mine, did I not realize just how wrong I was. There's just so much more involved. And I could have just kicked myself sometimes for this when I looked back at some suggestions I gave, like just for sure that would work to try this or that. And
I find that I've visited a number of care homes and people that work in it professionally, and almost to a one, they'll say it was very different when it became my family member.
mhm,
And that's one of the things that I do as far as outreach to people to prepare to care before this happens, to be aware. Dementia behaviors are cause so much confusion for people. They don't understand it.
mhm,
Um, so that's part of my mission. In addition to supporting existing caregivers, is to outreach that generation that's coming behind us. My children who think, oh, they have years before they have to worry about this.
mhm.
If Alzheimer's and dementia doubles and triples in the next 10, 15 years, that means my children will be caring for their spouses within that time period. And they don't know what's coming.
Yeah. Yeah. So well, number one, what a scary, scary thought. And number two, you're how important it is to be aware. And in fact, many of our guests on this program, listen, knowing that their caregiving role is coming up for them and they're preparing, and which I think is just great, because I would love for you to share your story, Bobbi, the journey for you and first becoming a caregiver, because becoming a caregiver and going through it is what resulted in where you're at now, with author of a few books and your certifications and the wonderful podcast that you're doing. But that's not where it all started.
Now, it happened at a time in our lives where Mike and I had become empty nesters. And we were looking forward to, doing some traveling, going on vacations. We had decided to build our dream home so our grandchildren can come and stay with grandma and grandpa. Really expecting, after having raised 4 kids, that we were going to be able to do the things that you put off until that time in life. And we had no idea that before that house was even built, both of our mothers had died within 9 weeks of one another. And because Mike's dad had health issues for many, many years, the first thing people said was, what's going to happen to Roger? And because I come from a long history of family caregivers and the belief that family takes care of family when you can, we already knew the answer. He's coming to us. He had been my father-in-law for 15 years, and to me, he was a sweet, henpecked man who lived with a very loud Italian woman who was very impatient with him. And I thought once he came into my house, which I really like to be warm and calm, and Mike and I get along really well. We laugh a lot. There's very little discord. I thought in my ignorance he would thrive in my care.
And I just want to say, well, how'd that work out for you?
About as well as, I was working, I had a corporate job at the time. And when I told people that we were bringing my father-in-law into our house, and when it became evident that he needed somebody in the house with him, they were worried about me. They said, what are you going to do all day? You're going to be bored. What are you going to do all day?
Because caregiving is just so easy.
Yes, you get to stay home. Yeah.
It's like a vision of on the couch in your pajamas with bonbons, someone bringing you bonbons, right?
Exactly.
And just channel surfing. Yeah, but no, it's really not like that.
Now, we knew that he didn't drive. He hadn't worked even before he was old enough to retire. He had serious health issues that we had been told resulted from a war injury. He had served during the time of the Korean War. He was in and out of the hospital a few times during the time that Mike and I were married. So I knew that he was going to need somebody to take him to his doctor's appointments and that kind of thing. And he had been under the care of the VA hospital in Pittsburgh, where he lived. So we had his records sent here to the VA hospital in West Virginia. And I was sitting at bed reading the records, and I run across paranoid schizophrenic, diagnosed in 1947, admitted to the hospital in Perry Point for 13 years.
Wait, what is that? 13 years.
13 years in a mental institution. During that period of time when they did electric shock treatments with no anesthesia, ice baths, all that kind of stuff.
Oh my goodness. So are you saying this was a family secret kind of then?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
I was sitting there reading those records, and I poked my husband, who was beside me in bed as I was reading, and he said, why the hell didn't you ever tell me this? And he said, I don't know what you're talking about. Because this was his stepfather. He was 7 years old when his parents married, and he had been told the same story as everybody else about this plate in his head. Mental illness wasn't something that you talked about. So at that point, I thought, okay, this is going to be harder than I thought it would be. I went and I took courses to become a nursing assistant.
My
So,
first job.
so I would be able to talk to doctors and understand what they were saying to me. And if there came to a time that he needed injections, I would be able to do that. Um,
Wow.
he was born and raised in Italy. He still spoke Italian. He had a heavy Italian accent, so I started learning Italian. So I would be able to ask him if he reverted back to his original language. Are you hungry? Are you in pain? That kind of thing. And he seemed to do really well for a while. And then he was behaving in ways that I couldn't understand. And I would ask the doctors about them. And a couple of times they took him in and they readjusted his medications, and his behavior became more and more erratic until the day he had a complete psychotic break and accused me of trying to poison him.
Oh.
Ran down the street, begging for help. Ended
Oh.
up in the psych ward for 8 weeks.
How long was this from the time he had moved in?
Probably about a year later.
Oh.
What I discovered was when he first came in, he was very responsible about his medications, counting them and put them in their little daily compartments and ordering them when they needed to be refilled. And which we didn't know, and he was happily pretending to take them and either flushing them or throwing them out in the yard.
Oh, I hope you don't have dogs.
So yeah.
Uh,
And he went from that they sent him home. They had told us he was never coming back, that he was so far gone that he would end up the rest of his life in the psych ward. And then one day they just called and said, come get him.
what?
He said, what do you mean come get him? You were going to keep him. And they said, no, he's under control now, come get him. And if you don't come get him today, we're going to put him in a nursing home and you're going to have to pay for it.
Oh, wait, so you were given 1 day's notice after you were told that you wouldn't be his direct caregiver anymore at home.
So
That
anyway,
blows my mind, Bobbi.
we went, we got him. He coughed all the way home. He wasn't able to eat or swallow the next day. He ended up the day after that back in the hospital, oxygen levels in the 70s. They sent him home with pneumonia. He nearly died. He was another 4 weeks in the hospital after that. And from there, things just progressed over the next several years, one crisis after another. And he developed Parkinson's disease, and he developed what was later diagnosed as Lewy body dementia, congestive heart failure. And like I said, he arrived with stubborn old Italian disease. He told me one day that you realize in the old country that women are second-class citizens. And I said, yeah, well, you realize you don't live there anymore and you're in my house now. And
Yeah. How was that received?
they're like, okay.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah. And so Lewy body disease is not an uncommon form of dementia, although we mostly hear about Alzheimer's. And
Lewy body is probably the second most common, but also one that's misdiagnosed a great deal and
yes,
little understood.
yes.
And in this case, we had an overlap because Lewy body has delusions and hallucinations, and so does schizophrenia.
Yeah. I would say your father-in-law's diagnosis was a big challenge because there's so many question marks. Is it the medicines? Because the medicines for schizophrenia can cause some of the movement issues that people with Parkinson's and Lewy body. There are a lot of overlap there.
Yep.
And the paranoia too, and the like I think you're saying, going down the neighborhood and saying that he needs help, and probably a lot of accusations your way too. I don't know if that's the case or not.
Oh, absolutely. When I kept telling the doctors that I thought he had Parkinson's disease on top of this because I saw some of the behaviors and it ran in his family. His sister had it.
Oh, okay.
And I looked over and I saw him trying to lift his leg to go up on a step and he couldn't do it.
Uh-huh.
But he kept trying, and you know, the stairs, they go up one flight and there's a turn and then you go up another flight. And he got up to the landing and he was still having trouble. And I said, stop, let me help you. Well, he must have heard me say, hurry up before she gets here, because he started moving as fast as he could.
Oh.
And I got behind him and he was almost at the very top and you could see he was leaning backwards. He was going to fall. So I put my hand on his back and I pushed him forward and he went down on his knees and she tried to push me down the stairs. She tried to kill me. And that was one of the times I lost my temper with him. And I thought, you don't try to kill somebody by pushing them up the stairs. If I wanted you to die, I'd have pushed you the other way. How can you think that I would do such a thing? You know? And, you know, one of those moments in caregiving where you really feel guilty because you know better, but I lost it.
I understand there's a lot of guilt in caregiving anyway.
Yes.
Yeah.
I said to my husband at one point, I said, I'm not the person that I thought I was. And he said, well, who did you think you are? And I said, I thought I was a good person, a patient person. I know he's sick. How can I lose my temper on the times that I did? But there was also guilt in, why didn't I see this before it reached this far? Why didn't I react quicker? You know, every time I thought I had a handle on it, something else would pop up. And I just kept feeling like I was failing. And even though the doctors and my husband said, no, you're doing a great job.
Right.
I couldn't believe it at the time.
Yeah, that hurts my heart. Do you think, just a thought, do you think that coming from a family of caregivers, like where it sounds like that was a pattern in your family, if someone needed to be taken care of, they're taken care of by other family members, to think of it like, well, they were able to do it and here I'm struggling and feeling like I'm failing.
Um, yeah, that's definitely part of it. And I have to say, when I recognized I had to leave my job in order to take care of him, a lot of people said to me, why don't you just put him in a facility? Why don't you just put him in a home? And to me, that didn't make sense. And I said, well, because I'm setting an example for my children.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. Yeah. 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 Um, and what a tough role. How did that impact your relationship with your husband? Because I'm understanding he was going out to work every day at this time.
Yes, he went to work to support us so I could be at home with his dad.
Right.
And financially, it made more sense for him to keep his job than for me to keep mine. Plus, I'm a better caregiver than he is. I mean, in the times when I would be away from the house, things didn't go the way I wanted them to. So, but
Can't imagine that. Isn't that the way it is though, right?
Mike and I have been married for 33 years and we really like each other. We always have. Like I said, there's very little discord in our house.
Right.
But during that time period, we fought more than we ever had before or since because the tension was so great. And we weren't sleeping. And then the accusations and, like you said, the guilt. And he felt guilty that he was going to work and, you know, his life outside of the house stayed the same and mine was very changed. And this was his father. And I reached a point where I thought, here I am stuck in this house. You get to go and have lunch with your coworkers and talk to people. So there was kind of that going on as well.
Because like it sounds like every aspect of your life changed as a result of deciding to be a caregiver for Roger. I don't know if you realized it when you first started that like it will impact every other part. I'm not sure I would have gotten that feeling myself if I were in your shoes, to realize just what a huge impact it is. And that choice is a lot of responsibility.
You're absolutely right. In fact, again, in our ignorance, I said to Mike, there'll be some tough days, but we've got this.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah. I would do the same thing, Bobby. I'd be like, okay, it'll be all right. I could do it.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And in all honesty, a lot of people do that every single day. Only they may not realize that it is understood by others that hey, this is not an easy thing. And
Yes. Yeah.
mhm,
And what happens with caregiving, I think, once a family member steps up to do it, the rest of the family lets them do it,
mhm,
because they figure that you've got it. And
mhm,
we have a tendency when people ask how things are, we say we're fine. And that's one of the things I teach people now. You do not say fine. You tell people I'm tired. You tell people I need help.
mhm.
You tell people I really would appreciate it if you would come by for half an hour so I can take a shower. None of that I did none of that. I tell people I made every mistake you can possibly make. Um, People used to look at me because this was my father-in-law and not my father and
Uh-huh.
say, "You must be a saint." And I'd say, "I'm no saint," and my father-in-law would be the first to agree with me.
It's tough for both sides.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, I what a beautiful gift to give people, to say, "I'm open to however it is you're feeling," and you're asking for that honesty. I'm not sure every family member wants that if they look at it like, "I may have to do more," and, "Oh, you're fine," or just not realize it, or they do realize it and stay further away, because it's not a role for everybody. Uh,
Well, yeah, and I do tell people, some people ask you just because it's polite to ask and they really don't want to know. But
mhm,
there are people who do just don't know how,
mhm,
in
yes.
what way. But you had mentioned this changing every aspect of my life. It absolutely did. Like I said, I quit my corporate job.
Mhm,
Um, I had always thought that I would write the great American novels. So I started writing articles and, submitting to see if anybody would be willing to buy what I wrote, and started selling magazine articles and worked for a newspaper for a while. And during my caregiving years, I thought I can write this story because caregivers would say, I wish somebody would write a book that tells what it's really like.
mm,
So I can do that.
mhm,
So I started writing it while Roger was alive, and then his care took over, and it just wasn't time.
mhm,
And then after he passed, I started writing it again, and it was too emotional. I was going right back into it.
mhm,
I spent more time crying than I did writing.
mhm.
So about 2 years after he was gone, I said to Mike, I'm going to write this book. It's going to be emotional. You're going to have to live it again. And oh, by the way, there were times in our caregiving years when you were a jerk. Can I put that in the book?
Uh-huh. What did he
Because
say? What was
he
Mike's
said,
response?
he said, of course, if you're going to write it, you have to make it real.
Yeah.
Because, people who have read it have said, I really get to know you and Mike and Roger by reading this book.
Mhm,
Um, and I titled it Confessions of an Imperfect Caregiver.
mhm. Love that title. Love the title.
And it reads like a novel, but every word is true. And that was important to us, that every word is true. And I kind of like it, not so much for caregivers who don't have time to read, but for family members who don't understand what caregivers do every day and what it looks like. And then they can see our story and not feel like they're being challenged by their own family member. And maybe they can look, even my daughter said, oh my God, Mom, I didn't realize until I read this book.
Right. Right. Yeah, Yeah, there's just so many emotions that you wouldn't think of being so highly charged around caregiving. And so those who aren't contributing, they're having their own guilt and shame issues over not being able to, and therefore, or staying away, and all that's attached to that. And then what you as the caregivers experiences, as well as the person you're caring for, because they're looking and saying, oh, I don't know if Roger was able to or did, but to look and say, you used to go to work, you used to look happier, you used to do, X, Y, and Z, and now you're not. And that's really hard to see, being responsible. And it's,
I'm glad you brought that up, because we talk about the challenges and how difficult it is to be a family caregiver who's doing it 24/7 for a number of years.
mhm.
But there's a lot of gift in it too. We had some very special moments when he would be just sitting with me and he would talk about his growing up in Italy and how he made his own skis, and a story about, taking the mule into town to get supplies, and the mule was fine. Um, uh, it was hard to get the mule to leave the house, and he'd have to sometimes take a stick and, swat it on the behind. But when it was
Mhm.
time to come home, the mule would run towards the farm. Stories like that you
Yeah.
would hear otherwise. And there was one Easter when it was just the three of us, and I did a special meal, and he sat at the dining room table and he looked around and he said, I never thought I would live in a house like this. Everything is beautiful. He said, I was
Oh,
born on a farm in Italy, and I'm going to die in a big house like this. I feel like a big shot. Thank you. And, the three of us are at the table with tears in our eyes.
yeah. Yeah.
And one very special moment I would love to share was, it was his last time in the hospital before he came home. He was in-home hospice for a few weeks before he actually died. And I
Mhm.
was sitting at the feet of his hospital bed, and he woke up and he said, I had a dream last night. God told me my job here is done. And I'm going back to Pittsburgh soon, and I'm going to be next to Shirley, his wife. So I knew he was talking about dying. And I
Uh-huh.
went and talked to the priest at the hospital, and, need to pay attention to this. And that's when we arranged to bring him home for in-home hospice. But I was sharing this story with a friend of mine afterwards, and he said his job here is done. And this man looked at me, he said, Bobbi, you were his job. He was teaching you to do what you do now.
Oh,
And
yeah, they're
I
teaching
hold on
you,
to that.
preparing you for the next phase of your life, the next
Exactly.
chapter, if you will. Oh my gosh, I just got goosebumps with that. I really did. Wow.
And I hold on to that. I hold on to that because everything changed after that. That first book, and then becoming a caregiver support group leader, and being as educated as I could, learning more and more about dementia behaviors and getting my certifications, and now speaking on the international level and reaching out to people every single day.
Mhm.
Um, he was the best teacher, the greatest teacher I ever had.
Yeah.
So there
Oh,
is life after caregiving.
yeah. Yeah. And that was your next chapter, and you were being prepared for it.
Mhm.
And then the next big book had to do with what Roger taught you
Yes.
in those years. Yeah, and then who would have thought? I again, I'm sure in the very beginning you had no idea
Mm-mm.
what this would look like for you. And I hope this gives some hope for others in a similar situation that feels like it's kind of over now. This is what it is, and that there's lessons in everything we do.
Right.
And how it turns out, it might not end up as a book or as or the things that you've done or that I've done, but it's something. There's something in everything that you get to take along with you. And
I was just responding to somebody on a Facebook group, that said, I feel like my life is over as a caregiver.
Mhm.
And, I
I can understand that too, yeah.
responded to her with, trust me, there is life after caregiving. And there are going to be, you're going to look back on the precious, the good moments, as rare as they you seem right now,
Mhm,
and understand the gift of sharing those moments. And also, um, knowing that you don't have to do it right every day
mhm,
in order to do it really well. And caregivers are and you're one of them.
mhm,
And if the thing that you take out of it is those special moments of clarity that you share with them,
mhm,
that's the reward that you get for what you've done. It's the hardest job you'll ever love, and sometimes you're going to hate it.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think those really important. In fact, I was gonna ask you, what do you think some of the most important things you just said it, is that it's it's almost like, when you have small children and they're when they're little, it's like the days kinda roll into another and you like the most tired you've ever been. You might be covered in you name it,
Yes.
like, "I just wanna take a shower," "I just wanna sleep," and yet when you get older, you look back at that with some fondness, but you're remembering though all those magical moments. And there's even magic
Hmm.
in those. And but in the moments, you're not thinking, this is just magical. You're thinking,
Well, there was, I'll share, it at the time, it seemed like it was beyond the pale. Um, he had, the way our house is, we were able to set up one of the bedrooms as a sitting room for him so he could have his own little apartment up there. He had his
uh-huh.
TV and recliner and sofa, his own bedroom, his own bathroom. And as far as meals goes, when he was able to come downstairs, he did. And when he couldn't, I took them to him. Um, but he was up there one morning and I was down here, and I went into the bathroom and I hear him, Bobby, Bobby, come here. I need you. I need you. So I jump up, pull my pants up, pee's running down my leg, and I go in to see what he wants. And he got the TV remote messed up and he couldn't get his program. And, you know, and so it led me to writing an article about give a caregiver a bath. I really could have used somebody to come in so I could go and take a shower.
Yeah,
And at the moment, it was just so upsetting, but it's such a funny story
it
now.
is. So it wasn't quite the 911 emergency you were expecting.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. Wow. I I often look back on things that were the most challenging for me too. And I think a wonderful lesson that you've brought up here is, no matter what we're doing or how it looks at the time, that there's always some important lesson inherent in that if we're just patient enough to sit with it. And it almost like it has to bake in its own time, if you will. There's a time for it. And even as a professional provider, families would come in and they're like, I feel like I want to help other people, and I want, like you would say, I want to try to write this, and they had a real drive to do that, and yet that was not the time because
Mhm.
they weren't free of some things, and their story wasn't done yet. The
Right.
story wasn't done for maybe a year or two after their caregiving role had ended, right? Because they're still processing and stepping back into life, and what's that going to look like now. And I think that that's a big part. I'm sitting here thinking, I know that's a big part of why, for me, my book came along, and that I was in clinic and I was busy in clinic, and a couple had come in to talk about hospice. And it was a younger onset person with Alzheimer's, and she wasn't that far along. She's fairly newly diagnosed. and they were both crying. And she said, I don't want my husband to have to choose a hospice for me by himself. I want to do what I can. And now, and even now, that's like,
Mm.
I don't think I've ever been quite so touched by a story and what people had asked me. And I just took my phone out. She goes, I know you're probably going to tell me no. And I'm like, oh, of course not. And I said, would you like for me to call and arrange this? And they were like, yeah. And they were just so relieved. And it was like an epiphany for me. And like, you've been talking about the stories need to come out. Like you need to tell these stories. And I wasn't like you, but I'd never written anything. I don't know what possessed me to think I could write a book or much less do photography when I was a hobbyist at best. But I had it all planned in my head by the time I walked out, what it would look like, what I needed to do. And I remember came out, told my medical assistant, she goes, ah, that's really great. You've got 3 people and people are waiting for you. And I had just had this great epiphany, but it, it, it was a moment for me. And I don't think that those stories or I would have been ready before that. It was
Exactly.
at that time that I needed to. And because I had been wondering for many years, thinking, I love what I do, but I don't feel like this is it for me. And never thought about owning a business, never thought about really writing a book or doing photography as a living or any of the things that I do now. I was shy. I went to networking meetings and would run out at first chance before I had to speak.
You
I'm
and
like,
me both. The first time I had to speak to a corporate group, I had to sit down because my knees were shaking so bad. I
literally
could,
shaking, right? I mean, you were like, they're gonna see my clothes move. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it's real. The fear is real. Yeah. I said, excuse me, I'm gonna run to the restroom just because I was gonna have to do an introduction who I am and what I do. Because I'm like, how do I explain what I do? I don't even know what I do yet exactly. And I would just run and like, I'm going to my car. I can't do it. It took a while. And now that was say 4 years ago, and it was just the time, right? It was just the time.
I'm a firm believer that things happen in the time frame that they're supposed to. And, each night before I go to sleep, when I say my prayers, one of the things that I say is, show me the path you want me to take.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that's not the prayer I did as a young person, but that's a prayer as I do as an adult.
Isn't
And
that
like
the truth?
I tell people, very often the road is long and bumpy,
Hmm.
but I get where I need to be. Um, and I also tell people never pray for strength or patience.
Never pray for.
For strength or patience, because how do you become strong? By carrying a heavy weight.
Hmm.
And God doesn't say Bobbi wants to be strong, poof, Bobbi's
Here
strong.
you go. Yeah.
God says, okay, Bobbi, you want to be strong? I'm going to give you another challenge.
Here's some more weights. Let's just pile on some more weight. Hmm.
Caregivers are strong enough, so please, caregivers, don't play for strength.
What a good point, Bobby. Yeah, and if you want to be more patient, okay, we'll just give you some more
You can,
trials.
yes. So ask, be specific, be specific.
Mhm.
And I have a very good example of that if we have time.
Yes, yeah, I think that's a great closure because I love this so much. Yeah.
Um, Things have been very difficult where we were in the last year or so of our journey together, and I could not understand why it was so difficult to do what's right, to do a good thing. um, and first of all, I kept asking that question, and I went to church. And one Sunday morning, and the priest got up and he says, I've been hearing a lot from people saying, why is life so hard? um, and why is it difficult to do what you're supposed to do? He says, well, I want to tell you, first of all, that nobody ever told you it was supposed to be easy. um, a lot of people have difficult issues in your life, but understand that when you're doing the right thing and when you're doing the hard work, you're earning your place in heaven. So when things would get really rough, I'd look at Mike and say, I earned my place in heaven today. um, but the one that I really want to close with is I kept praying, I need help, dear God, I need help. Please send help any way you see fit.
Mhm.
Please, I need help. And I walked into the hospital, and standing outside Roger's room was a social worker who said, Mrs. Carducci, do you need help? And that's when I got
Well,
14
that might be the most clarity in an answered prayer I've ever heard.
and they arranged for me to have in-home help 14 hours a week. It was like 2 hours a day. So I could go to the grocery store, I could take a shower, I could do whatever I needed to do. It made such a huge difference. So
Mhm.
I, be specific. And if it's not God that you're asking, it's when that person says, how are you? Don't say fine, say, it's pretty good, but I really could use some help.
Mhm. Yeah, and even if that person isn't the one who, like, we think of help, they're the ones that are gonna physically jump in and help, they may know of someone, or like, "Oh my gosh, I just talked to someone that does that." That's what, you just never know who somebody knows or who has an idea to how it's the networking piece of it.
Help can be cutting the grass in the summer, having your teenager come over and cut the grass.
Yeah.
Help can be doing your taxes or taking your car to be inspected.
Mhm.
Help can be picking up a box of cereal and a gallon of milk at the store. It doesn't have to be in there in the trenches of caregiving.
Right.
Anything you can do to take some of the pressure off.
Yes. Absolutely. So maybe then for caregivers, it's a great idea to think and have it even written down, some of the things that you could use help with that we just do that maybe not think about it. Because I don't know about you, but when people ask me direct or even in my business, like, what do you need help with? My face is like, I, I don't know. I haven't thought about it. I just do it. If I write it down, then, if someone says, I know of a good VA who does a virtual assistant who does XYZ, then I know what to ask for right then. But I didn't know that before.
Right.
I mean, I would just do it. And I just think, like, yeah, yeah. And yeah, oh my gosh. So the prayers of our youth are, please God, I want to do XYZ and give me, ABC. And then as we get older, it's like, please show me the way. Yeah. And I look back and see the most wonderful things in my life just landed in my lap when I was just open to receive.
Mhm.
And if I had just been on my path that I thought was right, I would have missed out on those completely. And some of the most wonderful paths I didn't realize was a wonderful path until I got way past it. Similar to what you're
And here we
describing.
are. It led us to this today.
Isn't that wonderful? Yeah, how I wish I was in Virginia right now and I could
Me
be
too.
close to, yeah, we would be friends, but we are friends. One day I'll be, I have friends nearby you too. So that could happen. Yeah. Before we close, I want you to, we're going to have links to Bobbi's book and to Bobbi and Mike's podcast, Roger That, in the comment section. And I just want you to mention your books because you are just so inspiring in that you've done wonderful things to help so many people. And that to me is, kind of, it catches my breath just a little
But
bit.
just remember, I'm no saint, and Roger would agree with me.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, maybe
Okay,
in my eyes,
the
that's
books,
okay.
Confessions of an Imperfect Caregiver was
Mhm.
book one. And then there is Caregiver, You Are Not Alone, which are short stories about individual issues that caregivers deal with commentary by me after that story,
Ah,
with, how to respond to it and how to deal with it. Because I think the more that we put our thoughts and our experiences together, the more we help each other.
mhm,
Because frankly, there are no experts in dealing with dementia.
mhm, mhm.
And people, they have different ways of dealing with things that can help us. And the more we share, the better off we're all going to be. So I'm a firm believer
Absolutely.
in using your resources,
Mhm.
and people are resources, and
Yeah,
their ideas
absolutely.
are invaluable.
Yeah, love that. And here we are, we're doing the same, and there's some wonderful, even social media has been a
Mhm.
huge boost for that. All right. Well, I would love to talk for a lot longer, but we'll have to close for
Yeah,
today. And thank you so
this
much,
was
Bobby.
great.
It's been a delight. And thank you all for listening. Please share, comment, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You're only helping us reach more people. You just never know out there who's going to need the information, right? So thank you so much. Well, take care.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.